From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in all the world's time zones. Each and every one of those covered like a blanket by this program, largest program of its kind in the world, Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell, the guy here for the weekends. All right, well, let's look briefly at the news, and I mean briefly. Republican support for Attorney General Alberto Gonzales eroded Sunday as three key senators questioned his honesty over last fall's firings of 8 federal prosecutors. Big standoff coming, threatening to result in Capitol Hill subpoenas of White House officials. Now, if that happens and the president decides to exert executive privilege, that begins to echo an awful lot like Watergate, doesn't it? Prime Minister Tony Blair on Sunday called the Iranian seizure of 15 British sailors and Marines unjustified and wrong. Now, that's pretty interesting. Unjustified and wrong. If you take 15 British sailors, or if you take 15 American sailors and you're Iran, you can expect holy hell raining down on you, unless they were in your territory. And I'm not saying they were, but I'm sure the Iranians claim that. The suicide attack against Iraq's Sunni deputy prime minister is now being seen as an inside job carried out by a member of his own security detail. Careful who you hire. Iran announced Sunday it was partially suspending cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog while hardline president there said the latest UN sanctions would not halt his country's uranium enrichment, even for 1 second, said he. A lot of bombs, might. Intel is going to China. Intel Corporation announced Monday it's going to build, get this, a $2.5 billion chip factory in China, giving the U.S. company a bigger presence in the booming Chinese market and boosting Beijing's effort to attract high-tech investment. That certainly is a big one. $2.5 billion goes a long, long way in China. In a moment, the rest of the news followed by unscreened, open lines. Anything you want to talk about? Well, you can go to coasttocoastam.com and verify the story I'm about to read you. There is now a sheep that is 15% human. The lead scientist behind stem cell research that uses sheep to produce humanized organs is Ismail Zanjani, chairman of animal biotechnology at the University of Reno, Nevada. Funded by millions of dollars in federal grants, Zanjani and his team of researchers hope to use a sheep to incubate organs that one day can be transplanted into humans, or perhaps cells that can be injected into human fetuses to treat genetic diseases in vitro. Working with Zanjani is husband and wife team Christopher Parada and Grace Amelia Parada, both members of UNR's Animal Biotechnology Department. Project involves taking human stem cells from the bone marrow of adult volunteers or from one of the federally approved embryo lines, then injecting them into fetuses of sheep before the unborn lamb's immune system develops enough to reject the human cells. The hybrid animals created by this transgenic mixing of cells are known as chimeras, a reference to the fire-breathing monster in Greek mythology that was part lion, goat, and serpent. Zanjani's work has now captured national and international attention, but some medical ethicists say that it might pose some potentially serious medical issues. One concern is that viruses specific to sheep could mutate into a form that then would infect humans. Zanjani said during an earlier interview, that's the real limitation. Whether there'll be viruses that could then be transferred into humans, and what effect that could have. I don't know the answer, said he. Well, I'm afraid I might. Not good. Now, I'm of two minds on this subject, being absolutely honest with you. If, for example, I needed a kidney, and without it I was going to die, and they offered me one that had come from a sheep, I'd probably go, bah, sure. Rather than die, I guess. But I really do have concerns about what's going on here. And if we start mixing animals and humans, I have this weird little feeling running down my spine that we're going to get in trouble. We'll see. It's going to happen. Whatever science can do, it will do. Last night, of course, in the first hour, we covered former Governor Fife Symington's revelation that he had seen the craft, not just the lights, but the craft that appeared over Phoenix a decade ago. And the line that caught me, I wanted to again sort of point out, he said he didn't tell everybody about it then, nor in 10 years, because he didn't want to panic the populace. And I brought up Brookings, and somebody sent me an email and said, oh, God, not Brookings again. Yes, Brookings again. Brookings did a study that said that if we were to be invaded, or if there was evidence that aliens were really here, it would be better not to tell all of us because it would panic us. It would rock institutions, religious institutions and others. And I've said through the years that I think Brookings is as right today as they were all those years ago, and I think that's what Governor Symington essentially said. And so you can pretty well take that to the bank. Remember this. If they have evidence, or if they get evidence, they're not going to tell us. So, as I have these well-educated, many of them with doctorate people who come on my program and assure me that, oh, yes, Art, not to worry, the word would be out just like that on the internet. Don't buy it. That's my opinion. And then, of course, you are aware, I hope, of this story. France became the first country to open its files on UFOs last Thursday, when the National Space Agency unveiled a website documenting more than 1,600 sightings spanning 5 decades. The online archives, which will be updated as new cases are reported, catalogs in minute detail cases ranging from the easily dismissed to a handful that continue to perplex even hard-nosed scientists. It's a world's first, said Jacques Panet, the aeronautical engineer who heads the Office for the Study of Non-Identified Aerospatial Phenomena. Known as OVNs in French, the UFOs have always generated intense interest, along with countless conspiracy theories, of course, about sensitive government cover-ups of findings deemed too sensitive or too alarming, here we are again, for public consumption. Too sensitive, too alarming for public consumption. Cases such as the lady who reported seeing an object that looked like a flying roll of toilet paper that went into the basket quite quickly, but many others involving multiple sightings. One case, for example, involving thousands of people all across France, and evidence such as burn marks, radar trackings showing flight patterns or accelerations that simply defy the laws of physics and are taken very seriously. So France really has released it all. And of those numbers, by the way, they used the phrase handful, but it was about 25% that remain simply inexplicable. Now, of 1,600 cases, 25% that you cannot explain is a lot. But it keeps coming back again and again and again. Too alarming, too sensitive, too much for the public. I believe that is generally a widely held belief in governments around the world. So again, when you hear people saying, oh, yes, Art, it would be released right away, don't buy it. Scientists studying pictures from NASA's Odyssey spacecraft have spotted what they think may be 7 caves on the surface of Mars. Caves! The candidate caves are on the flanks of the Ajimons volcano and are of sufficient depth. Their floors mostly cannot be seen through the opening. Details were presented here at the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference in Houston. Temperature data from Mars Odyssey's instruments support the idea. The authors say the possible discovery of caves on the red planet is significant. The caves may be the only natural structures capable of projecting primitive life forms from micrometeoroids. UV radiation, solar flares, high-energy particles all bombard the planet's surface. The spacecraft spotted what seemed to be vertical skylight entrances to caves below the surface. There's a sheer drop of between 80 meters and 130 meters or more to the cave floors below. During the day, one of the features, nicknamed Annie, is warmer than surrounding pits and cooler than sunlit areas. So there you have it, folks. Caves on Mars first, water, now caves. Now back to Earth. Scientists have scanned the deep interior of Earth, and they found evidence of a vast water reservoir between eastern Asia that is at least the volume of the entire Arctic Ocean. The discovery marks the first time such a large body of water has been found in the planet's deep mantle. The finding made by Michael Wysenson, a seismologist at Washington State University in St. Louis, and his former graduate student, Jesse Lawrence, now at the University of California, San Diego, be detailed in a forthcoming monograph to be published by the American Geophysical Union. The pair analyzed more than 600,000 seismograms, that would be records of waves generated by earthquakes traveling through the Earth, collected from instruments scattered around the planet. And they noticed a region beneath Asia where seismic waves appeared to somehow dampen or attenuate and also slow down slightly. Water slows the speed of waves a little, they explain. Lots of damping and a little slowing match the predictions of water very well. That's a lot of water down there. I always thought that was the case ever since I saw the movie with Pat Boone. Cranberries, apples, blueberries, cherries, the list of why you should be concerned that tens of thousands of commercial beehives suddenly and mysteriously died earlier this winter goes on and on. That's right. What do we need bees? Cranberries, apples, blueberries, cherries. In Massachusetts, cranberries alone are a $71 million cash crop for 400 growers farming 14,000 acres of cranberry bogs. The Cape has around 1,000 acres under cultivation. These cranberry farms are heavily dependent on bees for pollination. Known as, they're calling it colony collapse disorder, CCD, or fall dwindle disease, if you will. The devastation really began to become apparent this past fall and winter in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. This is getting very, very serious. Scientists have found no definitive killer. They really don't know why this is happening, but it is certainly scary to think about. I know a lot of people would say, well, what's a few degrees of global warming? So what if we don't have bees? The world will go on. Well, perhaps it will, but not as it was. Looking toward the sun, its official solar minimum has arrived. Sunspots have all but vanished. Solar flares, virtually non-existent. The sun is utterly quiet. Very quiet. The quiet, they say, before the storm. This week, researchers announced a storm is coming. Perhaps, they're saying, the most intense solar maximum in 50 years. Now, this prediction comes from a team led by the Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR. The next sunspot cycle, they say, 30 to 50% stronger than the previous one. If correct, the years ahead could produce a burst of solar activity second only to the historic solar max of 1958, and there's some scientists who say it may pass that. Now, during that sunspot cycle, we were having aurora all the way down to Mexico. It was an amazing group of years, and for the amateur radio operators out there, a real heyday. So, aside from what other effects it might have, and that would be on satellites, cell phones, all the modern little trinkets that we have that make life so enjoyable one way or the other, that could be really devastated by a big sunspot cycle, it will also bring really good shortwave activity. So if you don't have a shortwave radio, now would be a grand time to reach out and grab one. All right, we're going to do open lines, unscreened open lines. Anything you'd like to talk about is fair game. West of the Rockies, the magic number is 1-800-618-8255. Are you listening? East of the Rockies, 800-825-5033. If you're a first-time caller, you are an honored person. We have a special number just for you. Area code 818-501-4721. Wildcard line people, many opportunities there. Area code 818-501-4109. International, out of the country, no problem. Toll free it is, my friend. Call your local operator and have her dial 800-893-0903, and that'll hook us up. Those are the portals. West of the Rockies, you are on the air. Well, you would have been on the... Hello? Well, that was a very, very brief dial tone indeed. First-time caller line, you, however, are on the air. Hello.
Hi, Art. This is Steve from Leachville, Arkansas.
Hey, buddy.
Calling you about some lights that my wife and I have been seeing for the last 2 years in the southern part of the sky.
Yes.
And they, you know what high-pressure sodium lights look like, the ones street lights are made of?
Yes, I do.
They look just like that, and if you put your hand out in front of you, about 3 fingers are about that far above the horizon. And
they stay there just above the horizon, or do they move?
They move, but they don't really go any higher than about 3 fingers if you put it out in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really strange. One pops up, then another one, then another one, and then another one, probably about 7 or 8 of them. They kind of spread out across the sky, and then they move from west to east. Really, really weird. And
that is weird. And you've been seeing these lights for 2 years?
For 2 years. Probably a half a dozen or so times.
Okay, so not every night.
No, not every night. Because I live right below the Boot Heel of Missouri, and looking south would be the Memphis airport, and
right.
It's probably 100 miles away. The thing about it is, these are not like aircraft lights, and they don't move like aircraft. They just sort of hover there and then slowly slide across the horizon. The reason I'm calling you is I had a dream after you did that last experiment, the consciousness experiment, trying to call them in.
Yes.
And the only thing I remember about the dream is I was sitting in this nondescript room, and the last thing I remember is these, like, beans in front of me, and I'm, like, in a chair of some sort, and it's like lasers went through my eyelids, but it didn't hurt, and that's the last thing I remember.
Okay, well, I'm not sure how to classify a dream or to chalk it up. And by the way, I'm still getting email on that experiment, that consciousness or intent experiment, as it were. My God, that produced a lot of results. Now, it's fair to say that we did that right in the middle of what I would call kind of a rash of reports anyway, but they're still coming in. I mean, we just got flooded. A wildcard line, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello, Art. Justin in Voorhees, New Jersey. Good to talk to you again.
Good to have you here.
My question has to do with I know after many years you finally decided to do the intent experiment.
Right.
And I was really curious as to why, after many years, you said that you weren't sure what it would be. Why did you decide to go through with it?
Well, because the guest, thank you very much, the guest I had on kept pounding into me, and of course he was not the only guest, but people like Stephen Greer and others who use intent to get these things to show themselves. And I thought, well, a simple showing I wasn't asking for an invasion. I wasn't asking for little green guys to come down and drill holes in eyeballs or anything like that. Just a showing in the sky. And so, tentatively, I put it all together. My guest tempted me beyond all reason. And I thought it would be a good time to give it a try without the probability or even the strong possibility of dire consequences. And so we gave it a try. And I'm honestly going to have to classify it as a success. I'm still getting email. I had thousands of email sightings, quite a few newspaper articles. There were things in our skies. But again, tempered by the fact that we're in the middle of a flap anyway. From the high desert, the great American Southwest, I'm Art Bell. Because I am doing unscreened open lines, remember to immediately turn your radio off when you realize you're on the air. Otherwise, you'll get confused, and you'll sound confused on the air, and you don't want that, of course. So that's what we're up to. Otherwise, anything you have of great importance, we certainly would like to hear about, and that will occur in 1 moment or two. Well, all right, as promised, directly to the lines, totally unscreened calls, folks. Wildcard line, you're on the air. Hello.
Art.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, this is Brian in Oceanside.
Hey, Brian.
Hi, by the way, you're the first and the last of the no screeners, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Have you heard of somebody named Al Chop?
Al Chop.
Well, he was...
Doesn't relate at all to that story about the lambs, right?
About what?
It's not important. Go ahead.
Well, Al Chop apparently was the head of Project Grudge, which is the precursor to Project Blue Book.
Oh, yes.
And a buddy of mine who's in his 60s now, Tom, I won't give his last name, but he had a extended conversation with Mr. Chop and said it was absolutely fascinating, and it was his assertion that the aliens were actually coming from inside the Earth.
Can't rule it out.
Well, just because, I think we've talked about why they're here and what their interest in these barely modified monkeys that we are, and I think it would explain, the lack of travel time, for one, if nothing else.
Well, there's one other thing. If they come from inside the Earth, it would also explain their intense interest about what we're doing up here.
Well, I think part of that, too, is they don't want us to blow ourselves up, and I think also it may, fairly recently we found that big basic empty space out, where there's just no planets or anything, and possibly there was an intergalactic war, and, once you start something like that, it starts a chain reaction, and, nobody wants that to occur.
Perhaps they're fed up with the seepage.
What's that?
I said perhaps they're fed up with the seepage.
Yeah, and I think we're a mistake personally. That's my own feeling. We've discussed that too. It's hard to realize that when you're part of the problem, but I think if you were to come here to be a totally objective observer, you'd think we're a mistake because we're the only species knowingly wiping out every other species in our path.
It certainly is an interesting theory, my friend. That would account for why they're so interested, really, in what we're doing up here. It would account for a great deal. Could there be an entire race living within the Earth, somewhere deep within the Earth, perhaps? Sure, there could be. We can't rule it out because we really know less about the interior of the Earth than we know about the moon. We've been to the moon. Haven't been to the interior of the Earth, right? I think that accounts to some degree for my intense interest in these very deep holes that you hear about from time to time. Anything that goes deep into the Earth, I have always found absolutely fascinating. First-time caller line, you are on the air. Hi.
Art.
Yes.
That's Treetop.
I beg your pardon?
I was going to tell you a story about my cat.
Your name is Treetop?
Yes, sir. I'm a truck driver.
I see.
I can't believe I got through. I'm talking to the master.
Thank you. You were going to tell me about your cat.
Yeah, I told George this story, but I don't know if George told you or not. I've got the cat that rides with me. She's an '04 model, 6.2 pounds. She rides with me in the truck. And on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday night, when you come on the air, she'll stand up and look at me in the seat over there, and she'll stay up for a while you're talking, but during the week while George is on, she never gets up. She sleeps through George's show.
Well, It's perhaps
George is a dog lover, I guess.
well, that might be it. Maybe Treetop can sense the fact that I am a cat lover. I really am. And there's just no doubt about it. I'm really hooked on cats. They're such special, sensitive animals, and I'm not in any way casting any aspersions on dogs at all. Dogs are wonderful, but cats have this, I don't know, this aloof sensitivity. For example, if my cats stay far away from a given person, I have discovered that it is wise to stay far away from that person, period. In other words, they make very good judgments in that area. So, good morning, Treetop. Wildcard Line, you're on the air.
Art.
Yes.
Hey, Wade from Louisiana.
Hello, Wade.
Hey, I'm a long-time listener, and I haven't heard anyone pose this question yet.
Okay.
A couple of months ago, I heard a gentleman call. He had a compelling question about the abductees, and if they were getting abducted, none of them felt any shame about being probed and prodded and all that. And he had a question about that. Well, my question, I feel, is equally compelling. I'm going to put it out there. If the aliens are the mental giants that we profess them to be, then why, after 40, 50 years or so, why are they still abducting humans? I mean,
I can give you a possible answer.
Okay.
They may be doing genetic research that requires, literally generations to yield results. And so you have to continue to study your subjects.
Yeah, I thought about that because I know that we're still experimenting on animals with rats and mice and animals and things of that sort. But we're doing it for trying to find cures for diseases and things of that sort. So
sometimes we're doing it for makeup.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's about the only answer I could offer up. I have no idea why people are being abducted. Most of the guests that I've had on the subject have suggested there's a genetic link. There's some sort of genetic component to what they're doing. And that could well take generations to prove or disprove or yield any kind of results. And you would have to continue to abduct and test, I suppose. I don't know. I'm stabbing in the dark. Wildcard Line, you're on the air.
Hey, Art, good evening to you. Best to you and yours. Thanks for taking my call so much. Quick suggestion for perhaps a topic. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I'd like to throw it out there if you would.
Fire away.
Eugenics.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that at all?
Well, I am to some degree. What aspect of it? In what way? What do you want to know?
Well, I've done a little research. I happened to stumble across the subject myself and found it to be quite fascinating. And I thought it might be something, especially since the Supreme Court had ruled on it in 1927. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in Buck versus Bell, 1927. And I found it to be a quite fascinating subject, and I just didn't know if it is something you had ever covered. I've listened to you for many years, obviously, but had never heard you.
No, not really. How would you set it up? I mean, what do you consider to be the debate now?
Well, the debate, I guess, in that sense would be how it would affect future generations. And from what I understand, it says if we're not careful, the current push in this country for biometric fingerprint scanning, eye scanning for identification purposes, may provide a database for future generations who, ignorant of the past, may be condemned to repeat it.
Well, we're clearly headed down that road, that sort of identification. I was quite surprised when recently U.S. citizens had been required to get passports to go to Canada and Mexico, and I guess they're very serious about that. And I've been wondering what happens. I heard a couple of stories. What happens to Americans who were not aware they had to have a passport to go into Mexico? Because when you go into Mexico, they just go, yeah, come on in. There's some signs there about not bringing guns and drugs and stuff like that in, of course, but otherwise they just sort of wave you in. So I guess they're not checking to be sure every American going into Mexico has a passport, and when you come back to find out that you can't get in because you don't have one, would be kind of a rude shock. So then how do you get in? Go back down in Mexico, get a quick job, try to earn some money, come in the back of a semi or something? I have no idea. Wildcard line, you're on the air. Hi.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to tell you, I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm going to get this out quick. Jesus is the Antichrist. That's right. Wounded to death as with a sword, yet he did live. He was given powers to do wonders in the sight of men from the dragon, the serpent of old. That's right. The God of the Bible himself is the devil.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure I buy that. But on the other hand, I don't know. How can you have the recognition of good without the understanding of evil? I don't think you can have it. Everything has to have an opposite. So, in some sense, I guess God was responsible for the creation of both for our benefit, in a sense, a kind of a sense. First-time caller line, you're on the air.
Yes, Art. I'm Shane, a truck driver out of Phoenix.
Yes, sir.
And I was wondering, 3 to 4 weeks ago, my wife and I were outside, and we noticed a black metallic object. Guy there for about a half hour. He didn't know.
Okay, you're kind of breaking up on me a little bit. You're on a cell phone, obviously.
Yeah, we didn't hear it in the news about it, and we were by an airport, and there were airplanes going underneath it and stuff, and we didn't hear nothing about it. I tried to get a picture with my cell phone, and I couldn't get a picture of it. I was wanting to know if you heard anything about it.
No, I've not heard a word about it, but you might as well give up on trying to get pictures of things with a cell phone camera, unless you're virtually on top of them, or they're on top of you, I guess, and it's daylight. Trying to take a cell phone photograph of anything in the sky that represents a light or not much more than a light is going to be it's never going to work. You've got to have a really, really good camera, just the right settings at just the right moment, and that is why so many of these photographs are kind of blurry and indistinguishable. We're still not at the point where when you point a camera at something, you get as good a view as you do with your eye. It's nearly always disappointing. Someday with cameras, though, we'll get there. West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Hi, Art.
Yes, sir.
It's nice to talk to you again. My name's Andrew, and I'm from the Tri-Cities.
Welcome.
I was wondering, you know how they're trying to make artificial black holes on the Earth?
Yes.
My question is what is that supposed to help with us? I mean, how is that going to affect the Earth? Black holes are made in space, and they absorb energy and light and all that. So if they make them, and you said earlier on one of your programs that they're supposed to be bigger than what they imagined, that they would actually be life size, not life size, but big enough that you could see them with your eye and not.
No, you're quite correct. That shocked me. I read that story, and I thought when they said they would create a black hole, it would be infinitesimal. It would be very tiny, microscopic.
Exactly. I mean, what safety precautions will they do? I mean, if you're going to record it, if the black hole absorbs energy and light, how are they supposed to record it? Because wouldn't it absorb the energy from the computers, and possibly that would help it expand to a point of no return where they cannot shut down?
Well, there's always that possibility.
I mean, and then what repercussions could it have on the world? I mean, the world itself wasn't made to have a black hole in the middle of a cave somewhere.
I'm surprised, frankly, that nobody has yet made a science fiction movie. It's CERN, that's, the accelerator at CERN, that's where they're going to try and, very soon now, create a black hole. They think it will be relatively small and that it will last for some fraction of a second at best and then sort of disappear. But the possibilities that he talked about, well, we'll know when it happens. If CERN suddenly disappears, or some area around it disappears, or everything goes, then, of course, there won't be questions and inquiries. East of the Rockies, you're on the air.
Yes, Art. Yeah, I'm calling from Lincoln, Nebraska, listening on KFAB.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, first-time caller, too. I got through, luckily. Back in '97, I think it was August or July, you had a show. You were talking about the Men in Black, and that show was so interesting and scary. I'll never forget that show. I had like chills running up and down my spine that night. And I was so never forget that show. That was so great. I wondered if you were going to have another show about that.
Well, I might if there's a cause to, a reason to. I think there are such men, MIBs, who run around sort of taking care of things that they don't want us to know about. And so, yeah, if a reason comes along to do it, of course I will do it.
Yeah, that's very interesting, to say the least, for me. That was.
Why did it scare you? I mean, are you holding on to some sort of secret that they would be interested in?
Well, no, I'm glad I don't. But it was just very compelling, scary, interesting, everything all mixed into one. I mean, it was just, most of the time, I don't know what guest was on that night or anything.
I sense that you have some information. Frank, can you get a trace on this quickly? Oh, yes, go ahead, sir. Continue, please.
That was just, I'll never forget that show, like I said. It was just,
very interesting. Yes, expand on that.
What?
You say Nebraska. Oh, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think there are beings like that. I do, from the government or whatever, you get the feeling like you're gonna run into one of those guys someday or something,
All right, listen, thank you very much for the call. No, that wasn't your door. On the international line, you're on the air. Hello.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
Good morning. I have one comment and a question for you. The local radio station down at home, I'm in Canada right now, but the local radio station at home doing a show about Waylon Jennings.
Yes.
And they brought to reference your dedication show so many years ago when he died. And that just brought back some good memories for me. And the question I have for you, when are you going to try your time machine?
My time machine?
Yeah.
The answer to that is I'm never going to do it. I had opportunity to drag the time machine out of the closet the other day, and I reminded myself of why we never used it in the first place. It is a massive, and I mean massive, electromagnetic coil. It's really, really wound, and this one is designed to be plugged into the wall. Now, that's 110 volts at nearly endless amounts of current. Whatever the breaker, 20 or 30 amps, would take. That's a lot of current. And that is designed to be placed on your chest. Now, that thing draws enough current to get very, very hot. And I stared at it a while and decided, A, I would not plug it in. And B, if I did, I certainly would not place it on my chest. Wildcard line, you're on the air. Hi.
Breaker, 20 or 30.
Wow, I thought you were gone.
No, I'm still here, and you're here just for a few seconds. We're at the top of the hour. What's up?
Okay, real quickly, I found out that the U.S. government, in order to cover up the UFO phenomenon, they have a project where they actually, if there's a UFO video or photograph that too many people see, they'll actually get hired as a contract to duplicate that exact same UFO, manufacture it, put it on the news, and say it was them. They did it with the aluminum saucers, with the Avro car, which that project was never designed to fly. It was a media thing where they actually wanted it to hover, put it on TV, and say, hey, that's us with the saucers.
All right. If you've really got evidence of that, buddy, send it to me. I'm Art Bell at AOL.com or Art Bell at mindspring.com. That's ARTBELL at AOL.com, or better yet, at mindspring.com. It's a larger mailbox. I get thousands of emails. All right, coming up in a moment, Dr. Laurie Nadel, an expert on all kinds of PSI-type things. I'm Art Bell. Indeed, here I am. Coming up in a moment, Dr. Laurie Nadel has been conducting research into psychic phenomena since the mid-1970s, when she began to have direct experience of the paranormal. She is the author of Dr. Laurie Nadel's Sixth Sense, Unlocking Your Ultimate Mind Power, with Judy Hames and Robert Stempson. The book contains 110 interviews with remote viewers, consciousness researchers, and neuroscientists, including former astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the late president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Willis Harman, Russell Targ, Ernest Rossi, Jonas Salk, and late Roger Sperry, who won the Nobel Prize in 1983 for discovering the cognitive functions of the left and right neocortex. Dr. Nadel has doctorates in cognitive psychology and clinical hypnotherapy. Her ongoing PSI research has led her to study viewing the human aura, with Barbara Brennan and the late Barbara Bowers, an engineer who could actually see both infrared and ultraviolet spectrums. She has also studied psychonavigation and divination with shamans in South America. In just a moment, Dr. Laurie Nadel. Dr. Laurie Nadel, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me as your guest.
Oh, more than happy to have you. You've done a great deal of study, obviously, about remote viewing. Now, you've got to bear in mind that this audience, for the most part, is pretty savvy on the subject of remote viewing. We've interviewed so many remote viewers on the program. So perhaps you bring a different perspective to it. We know the British Ministry of Defense funded a secret study to find out whether people with psychic abilities could be trained for military and espionage purposes. And in your book, The Sixth Sense, you explain how the U.S. military intelligence community conducted such research for just about 2 decades. The psychic process used is called remote viewing. Now, I have a lot of questions about it, and as I mentioned, I think I've interviewed probably the majority of the remote viewers who were in that program. What is your take on that couple of decades?
There were a lot of explorations that were done. I just spent a lot of time speaking with Major Paul Smith over the last couple of weeks, and he again reviewed the chronology within the U.S. Army, where the research started in 1983 and officially ended in 1995. There's no doubt, based on what the scientists have described and reported, that that remote viewing is a real technology that people who have no previous PSI experience can learn how to perform remote viewing exercises, both for research and also for forecasting.
There's doubt in my mind, and but not so much about the fact that remote viewing is real,
right?
But here's a question you can try and answer for me. I interviewed, by the way, Mr. Smith, along with the others, and nearly every one of them, Dr. Nadel says, yes, oh yes, it absolutely works. There's no question about it, but we're not doing it now. Mm-hmm. Now, the United States was attacked, 9/11. We probably have as dangerous or more of a dangerous world than we had then, now. And if we could uncover where the terrorists are, what they're doing, where their nasty instruments are, any of that, we would be using remote viewing. Now, every remote viewer says, oh no, program was closed. It was embarrassing, so they closed it. I didn't buy it then. I don't buy that now. How about you?
I've heard different reports. I think officially, what we hear is that it doesn't exist, and what I've heard from different individuals is that there have been consultants hired from time to time to work on tasking projects since September 11th. But I don't have any confirmation of that in terms of the actual agencies involved.
Well, if it really worked, how could we not be doing it?
Are you assuming that the government is logical?
Good one. Well,
I mean, here we have something which is cost efficient, it's energy effective, it doesn't require dependence on foreign oil, it definitely works, it's gotten results, and I think really what it comes down to is that there's a culture of fear about anything that is nonlinear. People are suspicious. People in authority are suspicious of something which they can't necessarily understand with the limitations of their own mind. So they rule out that it exists. And we know that the mind is limitless in its potential, and that in fact the majority of the mind or the majority of the brain does not measure time and space. And so the majority of our own mental power as individuals, the majority of the brain doesn't know that it's not supposed to do that or it's not allowed to do that.
I interviewed the man who ran the British MOD, and he told me they sent out some letters to remote viewers and never got so much as one answer in their investigation. What do you know about that?
Well, Paul Smith was saying that they apparently sent out letters to, I believe, 12 people who advertised on the Internet as being professional remote viewers, and I think 6 of those people allegedly never responded, and the other 6 said that they were not interested. But then it's possible that there were other approaches made with some kind of cover story, and that people who may have been experienced in the field of remote viewing may have been approached but might not realize that that's what was going on. It sounds as though the entire British process was kind of like Monty Python meets the X-Files.
What is it that somehow convinced you that remote viewing really did work?
When I began doing the interviews for Sixth Sense, Unlocking Your Ultimate Mind Power, I think one of the first people I spoke to was the late Willis Harman, who had been present at the SRI experiments, and Russell Targ. And the stories that they told and the evidence that they gave was tremendously compelling. And of course, I've read many of the books, including Mind Reach, and have met a number of the people who were involved in that initial research. And it certainly makes sense that remote viewing is something that can be channeled and taught, because intuition, which is the knowing of something without the conscious use of reasoning, is a natural mental ability that we have.
Are you able to do it? Have you trained yourself?
I haven't trained using the remote viewing protocols that the military has used, but interestingly enough, I have trained with shamans from South America who use an ancient form of remote viewing, which is called psychonavigation. It's not exactly the same thing as astral projection, but it is an ability to project your consciousness to another person or another location, and to either pick up information or to exchange information. And it's done through a combination of mental focus and going into kind of an altered or meditative state, and also something which is kind of an affect link. In other words, following a particular vibration of emotion or energy or feeling until you make that contact and retrieve the information. It's used a lot in healing, and particularly the field that I work in is trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's used very often to connect with the source of a trauma or to release trauma that's been held in the mind-body.
Okay, well, science wants proof. Science wants repeatability.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I don't know, in the case of, say, remote viewing, they really want somebody to be able to draw an object that is given to them as a target
right.
Again and again and again. Now, how reliable have you determined that a good remote viewer can be?
A good remote viewer can be highly reliable when trained. However, my co-author Judy Hames and I, we participated in a remote viewing experiment at Princeton. It was called the Gunsfeld, which is a sensory deprivation chamber, and that was back in the late 1980s.
Did you actually go into a sensory deprivation chamber yourself?
Yes, I did.
Oh, no, I'd very much like to hear about that.
And the person who was running the experiment was, and the program was Michael Honerton, and it was very interesting because Judy was in another room and she was transmitting, or she was actually sending the impressions of the image, and I was receiving. And I was receiving sounds, and it's the sounds that I kept hearing were these kind of whooshing sounds like the wind. And what I was drawing were lines that were wavy and kind of staticky, and then some circles. And when the image was presented, it turned out to be a woman's head with hair that was kind of standing straight up on end, as though the wind had kind of blown it. I'd also done a couple of remote viewing exercises with Jeffrey Mishlove, who is the president of the Intuition Network and the Dean of Consciousness Studies at one of the universities out in California. I'm blocking the name right now, blanking on the name.
That's all right. What is it like, if I can ask, in a sensory deprivation chamber? How long were you in there?
In about an hour.
About an hour.
I was there for about an hour, and my eyes were covered, and I think I had something over my ears as well. I was reclining in a chair, and the room was kind of, I would say, semi-dark to dark, so there were no sensory impressions. And I kept hearing the internal sound of, as I said, wind or something that was making a kind of blowing or whooshing sound. And what I've discovered in the course of doing research for Sixth Sense is that, of course, not everyone's brain does not necessarily process information visually, and not everybody's intuition is visual, although it can be nurtured and cultivated. In my own case, I tend to pick up auditory impressions first, and some people pick up kinesthetic information. In other words, they feel it in their bodies. That's not so easily replicatable in an experimental situation, and I think that the visual techniques and exercises and trainings that have been developed tend to be more reliable and get more consistent results in experiments. What I found in the other exercises that I've done is again, I'll get auditory information first and not necessarily be able to pick up the shape of the target object, but then I haven't been through formal training.
Right. But you have extensively interviewed those who have. I think it was something like 110 of them, right?
That's right. 110 scientists and a good many of the remote viewers, and some of whom I am a member of the International Remote Viewing Association, and have gotten to know a number of people who have been the pioneers of the program.
What have most of these people gone on to do? In other words, after you leave, for example, the CIA program on remote viewing, what do you do next with your life, and how does that affect your life?
I think that anything that I know for myself, and I think in speaking with Major Smith, he was saying that you start off either not believing or not knowing or not having experienced any kind of opening of your sixth sense or paranormal abilities, and once that door has opened, you can't go back to what it was before. It's kind of like you can't be a little bit pregnant, or you can't go back to not having had sex. I mean, once you've had it, you had it. You know what it is, and I think that the mind does seek to grow and expand, and it becomes kind of a way of knowing and a way of perceiving that does affect and inform other areas of your life. It's my understanding that quite a few people have gone into teaching, financial forecasting, working with corporations. Some people work with archaeologists, and some people, just about everybody, has written a book about his experiences within the military remote viewing program. There are some excellent books out there.
Well, there are, and you're right. Just about everybody has written a book. I suppose it's irresistible. You were originally just I guess, a reporter. Is that correct?
That's right.
You worked for Reuters. Is that
right.
so?
Reuters Television. Yes.
Mm-hmm. London Daily Mirror.
Right. Started off as a secretary in the newsroom at the London Daily Mirror, and worked as a news writer for Reuters Television. And really had
UPI and Newsweek, rather.
That's right. I went to South America for a year, and I worked for United Press International and Newsweek, and I worked in Chile during the state of siege after President Allende was overthrown.
Boy, that's a long way away from remote viewing and PSI work, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So how did you make that transition?
When I came back from Chile, and there's been some very interesting research that I discovered a number of years ago between trauma and the opening up of psychic abilities or PSI abilities. And when I came back from living in a city that was literally under siege and where there was curfew and people were being taken away for interrogation by the secret police after curfew, and you saw some pretty horrific things and heard things and spoke to people who had undergone torture and been very badly beaten or spent time even in concentration camps. I came back and I had a kind of classic post-traumatic stress for a number of years where if a garbage truck, went past the building in the middle of the night, I would end up diving under the bed, without realizing that that's what I had done. And it was actually when I came back that I had a job reporting for the United Nations, and there was an apartment that had where a Murphy bed was. And the first night I was there, I put my bed there, and when I went to go to sleep, I kept hearing this old person's voice talking about dying and death and people dying and he or she was dying, and it was just going on, and it was very eerie. And I woke up in the morning and I realized I hadn't really slept. I just kind of been in this half-awake state listening to this voice, and it went on for a few nights, and then I moved my bed to the other side of the apartment, and I slept fine. And so I had this little experiment going back and forth, and it seemed like there was something that was trapped there, but I'd never had any experience like that, so I thought maybe it was me, and maybe this PTSD was just kind of making me crazy. And then one day a red eye appeared in broad daylight on the wall where the Murphy bed was.
Yikes.
And now this was back in the 1970s, where there wasn't a lot of information about the paranormal or psychic experiences. And I just thought that I was nuts, and was trying to figure out what to do with this apparition and this voice, which I figured out was probably someone who had died in that particular corner, and was introduced to somebody who had contact with the American Society of Psychical Research, and she suggested that before I check myself into a hospital for evaluation that I called the Society for Psychical Research, and I spoke to one of the people there who was working on some experiments and had been doing so for years, and she said yes, this was clearly a case of somebody had crossed over at that time.
All right, doctor, hold it right there. We're at a break point. Red eyes, my God, I don't like red eyes. That's always been one of the things that have bugged me. Dr. Laurie Nadel is my guest. I'm Art Bell. My guest is Dr. Laurie Nadel, and she wrote a book called Dr. Laurie Nadel's Sixth Sense, Unlocking Your Ultimate Mind Power. And I can pretty well understand that if you heard somebody who was apparently dying or being tortured, and then on top of that you saw a red glowing eye, you might well question your own sanity, and you might well check yourself in. Even somebody of the doctor's stature might well think she's losing her mind and check herself in, and she almost did that. We'll be right back. Dr. Nadel, welcome back. I can understand after sensing and hearing all of that and then seeing a red eye, you might think you were indeed losing your mind. So you came pretty close to checking yourself in, huh?
I had serious doubts about my sanity, and I thought maybe I had two brains, and one was gone, and the other was out looking for it. But it turned out that when I spoke to the researcher from the Society for Psychical Research, she said that this was all fairly normal for the paranormal, and that in fact I was starting to open up my psychic ability or intuitive abilities, and that the red eye was a communication, and it meant that the other side was trying to contact me, and that I would be receiving further messages in the future. And I wasn't terribly reassured by that, because I wanted to know why they couldn't just use the telephone or Western Union, and red eye was very disturbing.
Yes.
And she said, well, it's really, she said, the red eye is usually followed by the white lights. And she said, have you started seeing the white lights yet? And I said, well, no, I hadn't. And she said, well, if they show up while you're having a dinner party, you can just tell them to go away. But this is all kind of fairly normal introductory phenomena for somebody who is about to really, I guess, develop or open up was the word that she used, in terms of having some kind of a psychic gateway or an expansion of intuitive abilities. Mm-hmm. And this was in, I guess, the early 1970s, and there wasn't a lot of information that was available. I definitely looked into whatever books I could find, and there weren't too many people who you could speak to about this without having them immediately assume that you were out of your mind. I did read books that were kind of classic metaphysics, the autobiography of a yogi, and of Course in Miracles, and a few others. And one of the things that I noticed was that they all started with an assumption that you had to have a belief system in place in order to have a psi experience or a PSI experience. And I wondered why I had been able to have this experience without any belief system in place.
Well, I think the answer is you don't need one.
That's right. That's right. It was clear to me that there must be something in the human apparatus and the human mind. There must be something in us as a bioorganism that allows us to receive information in a manner that seems to violate our sensory understanding or linear understanding of what knowing is. And that kind of led me on a personal voyage of discovery and ultimately led me to write the book Sixth Sense.
Well, as you know, the quantum world provides a lot of answers to these questions. Listen, somebody calling himself SOS, I'll abbreviate that because it's not a nice name, in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, says, remote viewing is BS. If it worked, people would be picking lotto numbers and finding lost people. Have you ever heard of anyone finding a lost person with remote viewing? It is just hopeful wishing and phony science. How would you answer that?
I know two colleagues who are, you've seen them on TV. They both use remote viewing in their work professionally as detectives. One of them actually works with the FBI and has located missing people using remote viewing. It's not uncommon.
And, of course, the lotto. I suppose picking lotto numbers, now Ed Dames, you know that name?
Yes.
He claims that he can pick lotto numbers, and he claims to have proof of that on his website. I don't know.
I don't know. I did have a class in New York a number of years ago, and it was a class on opening up your intuition as a natural mental ability, as one of the many different intelligences that we have available to us. And one of my students dreamt the lotto number after one of the classes, and it was only missing one final number, but he did win a few $1,000s. So it is possible.
Okay. And I suppose if you were able to dream lotto numbers, and you actually did hit the lotto in that way, you probably would be very smart not to advertise it.
I would think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed.
And
I think that raises another very interesting question. I think, and in fact, I know that there were many people who have what we would consider to be extraordinary abilities in this domain, and they use it for positive purposes, for helping people, or for helping people to heal, for helping people to get answers, perhaps, about the source of a problem that could have been personal or professional, and something which may not be accessible by the conscious mind or by biological means alone. And many people work with humility and without a lot of flair, and they have these abilities, and it's not that they take them for granted, but the people in our culture seem to take it for granted. And
Doctor, is there any reason, if it can be used for good, if it can be used for healing, then why can it not be used for bad, for even making somebody sick? One would have to assume if it can be used, for example, to heal, then it could be used to affect the health of somebody else negatively if you wanted to.
I think, the stories of other cultures, in fact, in the shamanic world, particularly in the Amazon and places that I've traveled to, there are accounts of people projecting illness or misfortune onto other shamans for territorial reasons. This is an energy, and just like electricity, energy can be used to light up a room, or it can be used to kill someone. And,
exactly.
And that goes back to, we can refer to Carlos Castaneda, for example, talking about intention. And you can go back to the Hindu teachings, also thousands of years ago, Buddhist teachings that all talk about the importance of the intention behind why you are focusing the mind on a particular outcome.
Will the use of intention, whether it's for good or for negative, always achieve the desired outcome, or can projecting intention for whatever reason go horribly wrong?
That's a very interesting question. Can you give me an example?
Mm-hmm. Yes. As most of my audience is well aware, I've done a pretty good series of experiments that have been very successful with, for example, affecting the weather and producing rain within an hour or so of an area where no rain was forecast. We used it to affect people's health in a positive way. We used it to actually have spacecraft appear in our skies most recently. About 10 or 11 experiments of that sort, and they all worked. Now, I always worried when I learned more about this, correct that statement, when I thought more about this whole thing, I thought focusing, as I'm on the radio, I've got millions of people at my disposal, and certainly some good, healthy portion of them would participate in an experiment if we decided to try one. And so I thought, projecting perhaps millions of minds toward, let's take an example. Let's say a hurricane is headed toward the coast. This is my best example of what could go wrong. People would send me emails and say, come on, let's divert the path of that hurricane. Mm-hmm. And that sounds good on the surface, but then I thought, gee, what if we actually cause a hurricane to divert, we're successful, and we hold it out over the ocean instead of allowing it to hit land? Well, it might stay in the ocean for a while after we did our little magic on it or whatever we did with intent, and hit warm waters and build into what was just Category 1, now becomes Category 5, then hits land, and all we succeeded in doing was causing a more serious disaster than otherwise would have occurred. So, in other words, that's just sort of an example of what could conceivably go wrong with what was intended to be a good idea.
I think there's a greater power, obviously, whether you call it God or the universe or the higher power, and there are many things that we don't know in terms of the big picture and universal forces. And I would say that if you are collecting energy to help divert a hurricane, that you would also want to include in your intention a prayer to be guided, so that only that which serves the highest good will come to pass. Because sometimes we don't know how all the pieces fit together.
We're going through a period of, I hate to throw this back at you, but we're going through a period of intense global warming on the planet right now. And hurricanes are actually sort of like, you could think of them as the Earth's air conditioners. In other words, they take water that is too warm and convert that energy. Now, when you say the higher good, or the best for man, or however you want to phrase it, it may well be that the better good for man might be to allow this hurricane to build into, say, a Category 5 and produce the cooling for the planet that hurricane produces. Now, again, I'm just trying to say that we don't, I'm not sure we understand enough yet to be wielding this power willy-nilly, and so it worried me. And
I would agree with you, because I think that they're from an ecological point of view, or from a scientific point of view, there are too many factors involved for us to be able to determine the best for the whole in every case. And I think
do you have any sense, Doctor, whether one mind with strong intent versus a million minds with a single strong intent make any difference at all?
Of course, the mind with intent makes a difference. It's not it reminds me of the story of the boy who was walking along the sea, and there were thousands of starfish that had been washed ashore, and he started picking them up and throwing them back into the ocean. And I believe it was a physicist actually told the story. He came up to the boy and he said, "What are you doing?" And the boy said, "Well, I'm throwing these starfish back into the sea so they don't die." And the physicist said, "But the beach is filled with them. There are thousands here. You can't possibly hope to make a difference." And the boy picked up a starfish and said, "Well, to this one it makes a difference." And he threw it back into the sea.
Mm-hmm. A nice story. But again, my question was whether you believe there is a difference between one mind with specific intent and a million minds with specific intent. In other words, is there a collective increase in the amount of effect that there can be with the number of minds applying themselves to a single purpose?
I think with the number of minds applying themselves to a single purpose, yes, you can see very powerful effects. And unfortunately, what history has shown us very often are the negative effects. I'm thinking of, for example, the kind of empire of death that was built at Birkenau in the Nazi era, which was really the result of a kind of very cultivated and destructive intelligence that was very systematic, and which millions of people participated. We very often see the results, say, of the attack of September 11th was kind of the pathological cultivation of hatred of a lot of people, and the focused intent of several people, all kind of fusing together to produce that particular event.
I'm very glad that you mentioned 9/11, because there are so many now. There are claims made, of course, post 9/11 that somebody saw it coming or whatever. But really, honestly, I don't think there's very much in the way of pre-9/11 psychic warning that went out. Are you aware of any?
I participated in a seminar on dreams 6 months after September 11th, and the presenter, who was a psychiatrist here in New York City, said that there were anecdotal reports of hundreds of people having reported to their analysts and therapists in about 8 months to a year prior to 9/11, planes flying into buildings, the city blowing up, and even kind of more ancient archetypal symbols of birds flying into towers, and that there was a lot of kind of anecdotal note about that, but nothing that was nothing that you could say, oh, there was a tremendous precognition that was kind of on everybody's mind.
Right.
But there definitely was something in the, if you call it the collective unconscious or the morphogenic field. The idea was there, and it was being picked up. And I do believe that intuition or psi is very much like a satellite dish in the brain. And if you've read the work of Bruce Lipton, we know now that every cell in the human body has an electromagnetic receiver and a transmitter. So we are cellularly wired up as bioorganisms to take in information, most of which is not linear and it's not conscious. And so I think many people had dreams and presented them as disturbing dreams, but they weren't interpreted as precognitive dreams because
the only thing I was aware of with regard to 9/11 was the work, which is now no longer apparently ongoing at Princeton, where they were doing all the consciousness studies. And, of course, they were able to go back and show us the giant spike that occurred before 9/11, some hours or at least 30 minutes prior to 9/11, I think. I can't recall how long it was, but they had a giant spike. Now, you're aware of that work, I guess.
Yes. In fact, I've reported on it in the book in my book Sixth Sense. I had two very strange experiences before 9/11. One occurred 2 weeks before 9/11, and there was a possum that lived in the yard, and it died in a very public place. And in Native American the mythology, the possum represents expecting the unexpected, and so there was a possum that kind of came out of hiding to show that we were going to expect an unexpected death. And then two nights before September 11th, and again, this is something that, as a rational person, I'll tell you this story, and there's another part of my mind that is saying, wait a minute, did that really happen? But my daughter and the cat were asleep. It was about midnight, and it was September 9th, and an angel appeared in the room and covered my daughter and the cat with her wing, and she said, whatever happens, I will keep you and your daughter safe. And I looked at her and I said, I'm making you up, aren't I? I mean, you're my imagination. And the angel kind of smiled, and the room was filled with this white golden light. And
where are you located?
I'm located on Long Island, and I come from Brooklyn, and, angels don't appear to people from Brooklyn. I mean, I don't, it's very incongruous. I wasn't brought up with this. I mean, these things have happened to me, and I kind of scratch my head and I go like, wow, I'm like the least likely person to have things like this happen to. And yet they have happened. And I think there is definitely not necessarily a sense, other than energetically, that something was going to happen. But there were people I know. I had a program for teenagers whose fathers were killed in the towers. And many of the widows said that they had dreams a few nights before that their husbands were wandering around in fire and smoke.
All right, Doctor, I'm sorry, I've got to hold you right there. We're at a break point. Dr. Laurie Nadel is my guest. I'm Art Bell. Oh, my. Michael in Jonesboro, Arkansas, fast blast me the following. Hey, Art, I might have misunderstood you, but the Princeton eggs are indeed up and running. I'm listening to them and watching them on the Internet right now. That's really surprising. I thought the work at Princeton had been essentially disassembled, but perhaps this very important work is continuing. So I'd like to get the rest of the story on that one. Anybody who knows what's going on with regard to the consciousness studies at Princeton, by all means get back to me. If it's still on the web, then it's still underway. I'm Art Bell. My guest is Dr. Laurie Nadel. She'll be right back. All right. I'm going to do this, and I'm sorry I'm doing it because I know that it's wearing on an audience that has heard it many times. But Dr. Nadel, I've had one indisputable, absolutely conclusive PSI experience in my life. It was precognitive, and it occurred to me in Santa Barbara, California. I lived in a little garden apartment there, and I came home from work. I worked for Santa Barbara radio station, came home from work, sat down, watched the evening news, as was my habit. And as I was watching the news, I had this little, glass sliding door, as so many apartments have, which looked out on the street, and I could see my car out on the street, and it was parked where I could see it because I had had somebody take a CB radio from it, so I was kind of concerned about that. And so I kept it where I could see it if I wanted to. Anyway, I sat down, watched the news. Halfway through the news, or some part of the way through the news, just like ocean waves crashing over me, came this feeling that, more than a feeling, somebody's going to hit your car. It was really strong, Doctor. I mean, it was beyond strong. And so I uttered an obscenity, got up off the couch, went over, opened the curtain, looked at my car. It was fine. I uttered another obscenity, went back and sat down and started watching the news again. Immediately, it came washing over me again, just like big crashing waves. Your car's about to be hit. So strong, so irresistible that I got back up, walked over, opened the curtains, looked at my car, which was okay, but I did notice a guy walking down the sidewalk from the apartments, watched him. It was during a commercial or something, and he got in the car in front of mine, started the engine, put it in reverse, and banged into my car. Now, I watched as he did this, and it so deeply affected me that I fell to my knees. I actually fell to my knees because, obviously I had just had a precognitive experience, and it blew me away. Not so much, though, that I didn't get up, open up, and yell at him, "Hey, I saw that." And he said, "I'm stopping." And, we went out and had a talk, and it was all resolved. But the point is, there was no question about this, Doctor. I had this, period. It was real, so I know these things are real. But number one, I've got a couple of questions. Number one, I've never had a repeat of it. I'm not sure I want one, but if I did have a repeat of something that strong, I would know I was having it this time because it is that strong. And number two, I wonder if I had this, a repeat of this or something like it, and I was able to go to the window, open it up, and yell at the guy, "Hey, hold on a second, I want to talk to you about your driving," or whatever that I could do to interrupt what otherwise I would be sure was going to happen. Could I prevent it? So many questions about PSI, its repeatability. I didn't ask it to come. I couldn't get it to repeat for the life of me, and I wonder if I could affect things if it did repeat. Any thoughts on any of that?
Those are excellent questions. Starting with how does it happen or how does it come? We know that it is a sudden, spontaneous knowing of something without the conscious use of reasoning. It is also the ability to anticipate something that is inherent or possibility that's inherent in a situation, meaning that you could theoretically have gone out and interrupted this event, and in which case you would have said you had an intuitive warning that something was going to happen and that you acted on that in such a way so as to prevent it from happening. Many times when people have described to me having had a feeling that they should not go to work on a particular day, and they call in and they don't go to work, and then they never know what, did they prevent a car accident or did they just stay home? And very often it's a question of, better safe than sorry, or trusting whatever that hunch or gut feeling is telling you, even though you may not be able to see, through to the outcome. You may be preventing an outcome that would be unfortunate. I believe that we all have a personal signal, which is kind of like an intuitive language or an internal language. And you described a feeling like ocean waves coming over you. Some people get an inner voice. The inner voice that says yes or no, or don't trust this person, or buy or sell, is usually distinct. It's usually subtle, and it's in a different location.
That's right. See, the key is you're saying it's subtle, and I understand a subtle intuitive feeling. This was nothing like that.
Right.
This was more like a sledgehammer. I mean, this was, get up, stupid, someone's about to hit your car. And it was so strong that it could not be ignored. There was nothing subtle about it, and it's never been repeated, Doctor. I don't know whether I'd want it to be repeated, but there was nothing subtle about it. And is there any way to develop this talent?
Oh, absolutely. And there are quite a few exercises in Sixth Sense, and there are also a number of exercises that we have right now with the bonus offer, which you can look at www.unlockyoursixthsense.com/onetimeoffer.html. Many training exercises, MP3 audio to enhance the intuitive state. We have a remote viewing essay and a training exercise by Paul Smith.
Give me a few of them now, if you would. How can you develop this?
I always say that the best way to start is to go back to that time, a time when you had a hunch or gut feeling and you ignored it. And you always think about that and you say, gee, I wish I'd acted on it. And right now, I want you to step into that experience again as if it was happening to you now. And you're looking out through your own eyes. And you are seeing what you are seeing, you are hearing what you're hearing, you're feeling what you're feeling. And I want you to identify where and what was that signal. How did you know that something was going to happen? Was it a tightening in your abdomen? Was it a tightening of your breathing? Was it a warm sensation across your chest? Was it a voice that spoke to you from the left or the right side of your head? Was it a flash, like a little movie of something, like a little flash frame of a movie of something that was going to happen, or a particular image? Or was it, did you see a light flashing in front of your eyes? Because
No.
No?
No, this was a message. It wasn't I wouldn't define it as a voice. You got me thinking about it. It was the only way I've ever been able to describe it is ocean waves crashing, big, giant ocean waves crashing over my brain, telling me that somebody was about to hit my car. Now, there were no voices, there were no lights, there was none of that, but it was irresistible, it was giant, it was unmistakable, there was nothing subtle about it, it was big.
And you experienced it physiologically as kind of pressure of some kind, like shock
mental
waves?
Pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Before you mentioned that you'd had subtle intuitive feelings.
Oh, haven't we all?
Okay, so one of my colleagues said that when we ignore the subtle intuitive feelings, our intuition wants to grab our attention, and so that the sensations get stronger and stronger until something happens which is so compelling that it literally knocks us down, or mentally it's something that, like you just described, those strong waves, or that dream which is so lucid that you're aware that you're awake when you're dreaming. And there's something about the mental state that precedes the physical state that is so lucid and compelling that you always remember it because something was different.
Mm-hmm.
Finding the clues to what made it different is the path to understanding what your primary signal is, so that you can learn how to call it up through a series of exercises, and you can get a signal that says yes or a signal that says no, And then you can use that when you're trying to make a decision about something, and you want to get that clear read from your intuition.
Well, I can't for 1 second imagine that any human being would want to have this ability all the time, or to have it. In other words, it was.
No one wants it all the time.
No, I just can't. I can't imagine that. It would be so life altering. It would completely sort of screw up your life. So there is a downside to all of this, Doctor, and I wonder. Certainly, some types of personalities would be ruined by such an ability washing over them all the time, wouldn't they?
Oh, I think that the key word is balance. And when you speak to people, and I don't know if this is true for people who've trained themselves in remote viewing, but certainly people who are professional psychics or readers or mediums, people who lecture, very often describe the phenomena that you experienced as something that happened so strongly and so frequently that they couldn't turn it off at the beginning. They could not turn it off, and it completely interrupted their life until they learned how to control it and when to turn it off and when to turn it on. Because unless you can learn how to do that, of course, it can drive you mad. Sure.
How would you? Let's stick with turning it on for a moment. Right. Not that I necessarily want to do that, but what exercise would you recommend for getting to the point where you could turn on the ability to receive signals like that?
I think that there are two that are coming to my mind right now. One is to think of your mind as a room. And in that room are all of the mental abilities that you have, which would include logic and language and dreaming and memory, emotional intelligence, structure, organization, spatial intelligence, intuition, just kind of off the top of your head. And as you're walking around the room, I'd like you to notice, each of these abilities is kind of taken on a shape or a form. Where would it be located? Which ones would be larger? Which ones would be in the forefront? And how prominent or hidden would your intuition be in this representation of your mind as a room?
Okay. I do think that people who develop their intuition are, if you look around the world, right, probably the more successful people, the people who make more money, the people who achieve more in life. And I think they simply listen to themselves and they become successful as a result of that. So I think there is something to that.
There was a recent survey of chief executive officers by Burson Marsteller, which is an advertising agency, that showed that 62% of CEOs say that they trust their intuition when they make their decisions based on intuition. Mm-hmm. And I think that, we look at a lot of studies in business and people in upper management and visionaries who become entrepreneurs or who found businesses based on new patents or new inventions usually score off the charts in intuition. And if they were to walk around that room of their mind, their intuition would probably be a very large chair that they could sit in and feel comfortable with. So it would be the place that you go to first in that room. So it's just another way, that's a metaphor for getting comfortable with how important is your intuition and how comfortable are you with your intuition. People who, there was a very famous story about Conrad Hilton. When he was a young man, had a lot of hunches, and he walked into this old flea bag of a rooming house where the oil rig workers slept in shifts on these wooden planks. And he had a vision of an elegant chandelier and very well-dressed businessmen and women walking through the lobby of the hotel, and he went, aha, a world-class hotel for business people. And he went to the bank, and he described what he'd seen, and they laughed at him. And they said nobody would go to that part of town, and the building was a flea bag. And eventually he was able to raise the money, and that became the world's first Hilton hotel. He had a dream once about a zero, and he called and he told his lawyer, who was putting in a bid for a property, to add 10 to the bid, and that's what enabled him to buy property in Chicago that became a Hilton hotel. So people very often who are very, very successful at a very high level trust their intuition almost completely.
I believe it. I really do believe it. And it's interesting. They really have done this study. It would sure be interesting to go to some of the most successful people in the world and actually test their PSI ability. Have there been any studies that have done this other than asking whether they trust intuition? I mean, actually sitting them down and testing them versus perhaps people who have not had such luck?
There have been, periodically studies of leaders, but on Chapter 6 of my book, we look at the work of Ned Herman, who was a vice president of General Electric, and who developed a 120-question instrument, which is a kind of inventory that looks at the 4 different sections of the brain, and one of them being what they call the intuitive quadrant of the brain. Mm-hmm. And he's actually done extensive research over the years with CEOs and corporate leaders and has quite a lot of statistical evidence. You can go to their website, which is hbdi.com, and there's also one of the bonus gifts is a chapter from his book explaining how these different quadrants of the brain work and how they correspond to leadership and other different types of professional choices.
So you can actually sit down, quiet the mind, and attempt to explore these generally unexplored areas of your brain. How do you know when you're in the right part of the room, so to speak? Is
Practice.
There a way?
And they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Yeah.
They practice. And I like to say that, when it comes to intuitive ability, it is very much like musical talent. We can all learn how to play chopsticks on the piano, and we can all learn how to do basic intuition exercises so that we can become familiar with what that personal signal is. And if you practice enough, you'll be able to play Mozart, but very few of us will be able to play Mozart at Carnegie Hall or will be able to function as a concert pianist. Some people are highly gifted in intuitive intelligence, and they tend to be the Mozarts, if you will. They tend to have those natural gifts, whether it's as inventors or scientists or business leaders or entrepreneurs. That tends to be where their natural talent is. Some people have greater talent in the area of mathematics or language or logic or art or mechanical intelligence, which you remember in school there were those kids who could take the watch together and put it apart. They could take the watch apart and put it together without looking at the diagram, but perhaps they didn't do so well in tests. And very often they were told that they weren't the smart kids. And now they're mechanics, and you bring your car in so that they can fix it. So they just had a different kind of intelligence. And intuition is a different kind of intelligence. And as kids and as students, it's not recognized and it's not cultivated. And now we have to relearn as adults, because the research shows that 43% of children between the ages of 8 to 12 tend to naturally rely on their intuition. And by the time we get to be an adult population here in the United States, that number has dropped to 25%.
Yes, we're trained out of it. All right, Doctor, hold it right there. When we get back, the doctor's got something to say about orbs, and I've got something to say about orbs, too. It connects to September 11th. We'll be right back. Well, I've never known what to make of orbs. I guess for a while, the website actually collected orb pictures, but we got so damn many of them that we stopped doing it. I don't know. Orb pictures are intriguing on the one hand. I always thought they could be explained by the use of flash and a million other reasons, but I do think there's something more to these orbs than than meets the eye and the skeptic in all of us. I'm Art Bell. In a moment, back to Dr. Laurie Nadel. You know, nobody ever asked me to describe how I got that message before. I never really thought about it. It really caused me to sit for a few moments and try and recall exactly how I received that message. No, there was no voice. It was just an overpowering knowing, and it was knowing of what exactly was going to happen. And it wasn't subtle. It was like a sledgehammer, but it was just a knowing. There was no inner voice or anything like that. It was just a knowing. And at the time, I guess I could have considered it like a voice, but it wasn't. It was simply a knowing. If you can imagine that, your mind suddenly just knowing something is going to happen, and then something external pushing on you so hard that you couldn't ignore it. That's exactly what it was. Doctor, welcome back. Orbs. For years, we've had thousands and thousands of orb pictures, and when I first saw them, my mind sort of dismissed them as artifacts of flash photography. How about you?
I've seen orbs, and excuse me. There were actually orbs visible at dusk a few days and a few weeks after the attack on the World Trade Center, and there have been series of photographs that have been taken both with small kind of disposable cameras and sophisticated cameras of dozens, in some cases hundreds of orbs in the subway stations and tunnels underneath the World Trade Center in the months after the attack, as well as over the rescue workers' heads. And they're quite compelling, and they're quite dramatic. I think that the range of cameras used kind of rules out the possibility that it's a phenomenon that's limited to the camera, as you said, an artifact of some kind.
What do you think they are?
I think they're presences of. I think that they are non-physical, energetic presences that are again signs or communications or contact that are not of the physical world. I've read interpretations that say that they are made out of plasma gases, but I don't know that anybody. I think that that's a theory. I don't know that anyone's actually taken an orb to a laboratory.
The temptation, of course, is to say, I've heard people say, well, they are the souls of the deceased. Do you go that far?
They have that very haunting kind of quality, and that was my first thought, and it actually kind of took my breath away, that these are the souls of the deceased who are hovering over and around that particular site where there was so much sudden and tragic death within minutes, and that the orbs are the energy bodies, if you will, of those whose physical bodies were immolated.
Boy, I don't want to believe that. I'm not sure why I don't want to believe that. I guess I want to believe that that if there is a continued consciousness or energy after death, that something other than floating around in the immediate area of the unfortunate circumstance or tragic circumstance is ahead for us, not just hanging around.
Well, they don't hang around for very long, and there are, when you read the accounts of paranormal investigators, and certainly you have spoken to people who are ghost researchers, that
yes.
The phenomena of traumatic death or sudden death, it kind of shoots the consciousness outside of the physical body, and that there's a for many, it's a shock, and until the consciousness recognizes that there's someplace else to go, there's that moment, if you will, of kind of not knowing. And I think the manifestation of the orbs right after 9/11, so soon after 9/11, may have represented that kind of collection of energies of what just happened, where are we, and what do we do now?
Doctor, are you convinced there is a continuation of some sort of consciousness following physical death?
Absolutely.
You are?
Absolutely.
What convinced you? Being convinced is that's a very strong expression of belief. Why do you believe that so strongly?
A number of years ago, there was a report on a local CBS station of they call it instrumental transcommunication. I think you referred to it as something else, in which the form of the deceased forms on a television or a computer when it's not on, or when it's tuned to a frequency without a station. And I went to Germany and spoke with one of the physicists who was conducting some of the research. His name was Ernst Sinkowski. Mm-hmm. And his explanation was very compelling, because the information that we acquire during the course of our lifetime cannot be broken down into matter. You think about it, all of the data that you've acquired through your 5 physical senses and your 6th sense, right, all of the knowing, he said it's not matter and it can't be destroyed. And all the information of consciousness about who you are, the essence of who you are, that cannot be reduced into molecules and electrons, but yet it exists. And the conversation I had with Roger Sperry before he died had to do with the nature of consciousness and the circuitry, if you will, that has designed the brain and the healing intelligence that knows exactly when to make the exact number of healthy new cells when you cut your finger, or how to digest your food. If you think about it, do you know how to digest your food?
No.
No, I don't know either. But yet you have this circuitry, if you will, you have this blueprint, an operating system, and that intelligence that designed it and that runs it cannot be broken down. That consciousness cannot be broken down into matter, and yet it exists. Now, the assumptions of Western science, reductionism, of course, is that everything can be reduced into matter and components of matter. And the subject of consciousness is threatening to many because it violates that assumption. So when we go into areas of remote viewing or consciousness research, and you have the kind of mainstream scientific view that these studies, results in the lab, statistically significant findings, are really artifacts, because that can't possibly happen, because it can't be explained through the 5 physical senses and reductionist principles. To me, that's kind of like saying, well, if you tried to measure water in a sieve, you would then blame the water and say that the water doesn't exist because it runs through the sieve, instead of saying maybe we need to design another way of measuring water. We are trying to measure something scientifically using protocols that really were not designed to measure something that is of its very nature non-physical, and indestructible. And the circuitry, I mean, the most universal example, I think, is the circuitry that lives within us, that helps us to be healthy, that helps us to run as a bioorganism, and that also is capable of acquiring and holding information and synthesizing information and solving problems, coming up with solutions. Those are not electrons, and that consciousness remains intact when the physical organism leaves. I truly believe that.
Yes. Have you looked at the various evidences for communication with the other side? There's all kinds of beyond anecdotal, in my opinion. Right. For example, recordings that are done that seem to catch voices that come from who knows where.
Right. Dr. Sinkowski played me many of those, and we did do a session in which we tuned to an open frequency and didn't hear anything that was definable as a voice, but some of the research that's been done in this country by, say, Mark Macy of the images and the voices that have been captured electronically, very, very compelling. And it's my understanding that no one has been able to disprove it. No one has been able to prove that it's a fraud or that it's a hoax. Even the most determined skeptics have had to say we can't disprove that this is a real phenomenon.
No, that's quite true. What's being said by these voices is many times, to me, very concerning. I mean, we have this image in our mind of the afterlife as, a heaven, a very nice place to be, and frankly, what's said by a lot of these voices doesn't describe that.
I think it depends which religion or which culture or which model you look at. I think the Judeo-Christian model of heaven is only one of many different models of what exists in the afterlife.
Do you have a vision or what you feel is an accurate description of what the other side may be?
I had a near-death experience and when I was 43, and it was not the traditional near-death experience where you get absorbed into the white light, but there was looked like a door on the wall, and I knew that was the tunnel that I had to go through to get to the white light. And there was a force field in the room that was like an invisible shield that kept pushing me away from the door and pushing me back towards my body.
Did you actually have an arrest of breathing and heartbeat and that sort of thing?
I was having a near fatal asthma attack, and the doctor said later that I should have died. And I was told as I was trying to go over to the white light that I was being pushed back forcibly. And I could observe my body. I could see my body in spasm and choking. And I was told that I was meant to recover. And in fact, I was told that I would use that experience to help other people. And that led me to, again, pursue another career in psychology and clinical hypnotherapy and working in the area of stress and health and post-traumatic stress and teaching people how we have this very deep ability to call upon our intuition and creativity and healing intelligences to recover.
So you got to a door. Right. Is there anything else you can describe about it? You said you felt a sort of a force field or something pushing you back.
There was a force field, and then there was a presence in the room who I didn't see, but who spoke to me. And then out of the door, there came a shape that was, as it got closer to me, it was an old white man with a beard. He looked like he was Chinese or Tibetan, and I was at that time administering Reiki to the area of my body where it was completely blocked, and that this form would come towards me and then kind of dissolve into white light, and it kept coming out of the door and just kind of crossing the room and dissolving. Now, that really kind of convinced me that there is another world, and there are other planes of existence and experience that we don't necessarily understand and that are not physical. And after that particular experience, I did go into a near-death state, which was very kind of cold and gray, and in Buddhism they call it the void, and it's one of the states that you enter into after death. I have experienced that, and have also written about that. I think that if you've ever read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, I mean, he describes different types of near-death experiences, and I think the one that I had was number 4, But most people know of the one where people are taken into the white light and they're shown all kinds of wonderful things, and then they come back. It is a life-changing experience.
Oh, I would imagine. And in a lot of ways, I would imagine very comforting, and probably would, I guess a lot of people who have had NDEs, I've never had one, are therefore not afraid any longer so much of death.
Not afraid of death. And what I was going to share is that in other cultures, in all over the world, people accept that there is a spiritual world, or that there's a spirit world that is invisible to most people, but which interacts with us constantly. We can communicate even if we can't necessarily see, and we can receive thought forms or energetic impressions or information in dreams from people or beings who may be guides or maybe animals or maybe ancestors, and it's no big deal. And in our highly rational scientific society, we seem to have forgotten one of the principles that was basic to Descartes, who we know is one of the fathers of reason. And it was Descartes himself who said that there were two excesses, and one is to exclude reason, and the other is to admit only reason. Mm-hmm. I think there are so many things that just go beyond reason, that other parts of the world, that things happen every day, and it's just no big deal. And I think that embracing that we don't know a lot of things, that not everything can be explained through reason, but that doesn't mean we have to rule them out. It's a much healthier way to go.
Well, I have to kind of live between both worlds. Mm-hmm. The people like yourself, and then I, of course, interview many doctors and scientists who tend to really dismiss this sort of thing. And if you get right down to it and ask them about a belief in God, they just simply say no. And so I live between these worlds.
Right.
And I'm not really sure what I believe myself. I tend, I had the experience, which I described to you,
right?
Which was PSI, but that is of a living artifact of a living brain. When we get to talking about life after death, that's sort of an entirely different matter in my way of thinking. I can understand that our brains probably have capacities and abilities that we have not explored, not developed. Certainly I haven't. How can I not believe that? I experienced it. But then when we get to questions of life after death, I have no experience. And I listen to people like yourself who have had NDEs, and I hope you're right.
You hope I'm right about what?
I hope you're right about there being an existence after physical death.
I think that there is something after physical death that may not be understandable to us. I don't think that I personally don't believe that you go to heaven and you hang out in the traditional way and play the harp and everything is wonderful. I think and I spent many years and training and reading in Buddhism, and I do believe that there are different levels of experience and growth in consciousness.
I'm not looking forward to a harp. I've never been big on harps,
yeah.
nor hanging out on clouds or any of that other traditional sort of stuff.
Right.
So, Doctor, listen, we're at the top of an hour, and yet another hour. And what I'd like to do is open up the phone lines and let people ask you questions.
Great.
How about that?
Fantastic.
All right. When we get back, Dr. Laurie Nadel will indeed begin to answer your questions. And I know you, too, have many of them. So knowing the portals or listening carefully for those numbers when we come back will give you that opportunity. My guest is Dr. Laurie Nadel, and it's your opportunity to ask her questions. And we've covered one heck of a lot of territory, so I'm sure you've got a few. Her book is Dr. Laurie Nadel's Sixth Sense, Unlocking Your Ultimate Mind Power. It certainly does exist. It's the unlocking part of it that is the big question for me anyway. So anyway, we have covered a lot of ground, and if you have questions, they're coming up next. Doctor, very quickly, before we go to the phone, I know you have a doctorate in clinical hypnotherapy.
Right.
Have you done a lot of work in that field?
Yes, I have, since 1991.
I've interviewed people in that field who claim to have taken people through past lives. In other words, right down to their own birth and then into another life. Have you done any work in that field?
Yes, I have. I've done quite a bit of work in that field, and have done also quite a bit of work with people who have had very unsatisfactory lives where they've gone back actually into the womb and were able to understand something that was going on in their mother's life before they were born that kind of resolved a theme of unworthiness or the feeling that they weren't meant to be here. Something that really unlocked something that they had not ever been able to figure out.
So you've actually had the experience of regressing somebody and then bumping into another life?
Yes.
What's that like? I mean, it's. I think that would just scare the heck out of me to suddenly have take somebody back and then bump into the beginning or the end, I guess it would be, of another life.
Well, the processes as they exist and the way I work, I'm very careful to set it up in such a way so that the person isn't likely to be abruptly re-experiencing, say, traumatic death of some kind or something very shocking. And so it's very interesting, as you know, the system of chakras, which says that we have 7 energy centers that correspond with the spine, but we also have chakras in the soles of our feet. And the method that I've developed actually very gently has people focus on the soles of their feet when they regress, so that they begin to feel what the ground feels like, what the temperature is like, what kind of shoes they're wearing, and kind of work their way up from the ground up, because that way they are literally less likely to have anything that's coming from their imagination, because the feet don't lie. It's not wishful thinking. I mean, they're really picking up data that is perhaps stored in that part of us which cannot be explained logically, but which has all of the information of where we've come from and where we've been, both biologically and spiritually. I mean, we say that there are 2 different timelines. You can be regressed back to a biological ancestor, or you can also go back to a spiritual lifetime that you've experienced in another era.
So then, Doctor, you do believe in reincarnation?
I do believe in reincarnation, yes.
Wow. Okay, to the phones as promised. Don on a wild card line in Omaha. You're on with Dr. Nadel.
Oh, hey, Art. Very cool to talk to you. About 10 or 11 years ago, I had what I thought was a very strange thing happen to me. I was leaving Omaha to go down to my native town of Wichita to just to visit, and right before I left, I had a very strong feeling, almost like a voice, but not an audible voice, that said, when you return, something will have changed. And it sounded kind of ominous, and I kind of shrugged it off. And I went down there, and on the last day I was there, I was walking downtown there, and I happened to look at my watch, which is unusual because I don't usually wear a watch. I happened to pack the one I had for this trip. I looked at the watch, and it said 2:30, and I didn't think anything of it. I got back the next day. I kind of crashed out because I was tired. And about 2:30 in the afternoon, there was a knock on my door. My neighbor came over, and he said, "Guess what happened?" I said, "What?" He said, "The manager of the apartment building collapsed, had a massive heart attack, and died while he was mowing the lawn yesterday." I said, "Great. What time did this happen?" He said, "Oh, 2:30. I'm like, "Oh, great."
Yeah, okay. Doctor, coincidence or?
Well, Carl Jung, who with Sigmund Freud was one of the fathers of psychoanalysis and psychologists, we know it, had a term called synchronicity. Synchronicity being a meaningful coincidence. Synchronicity, as described by Russell Targ from a physics point of view, is kind of a glitch in time in which we have a mental event that for some reason makes us aware of something that we wouldn't otherwise be aware of, and it's connected to the physical event. So you have that sense of knowing, or you have a sense of time kind of collapsing. And Jung said that very often, it's almost a universal experience that a clock will stop at a time that somebody dies, and we won't know why the clock has stopped, and then we'll find out that somebody has died at just that time, and that is not uncommon. And again, if we're looking at physics and non-local phenomena, there are all kinds of energies that are interconnected. And it is possible for us, again, if you think of your intuition as a kind of satellite dish, you're able to download or downlink data that cannot necessarily be explained through the five physical senses.
I believe that.
I would say that was synchronicity at work.
Okay. First-time caller line, Evelyn in Fort Worth, Texas. You're on the air with Dr. Nadel. Hi.
Hi. First, I'm honored to talk with you, Art, and I've listened to you for about over 20 years, and I really want to thank you for the many truths that you continue to give to this planet. And I have to tell you, and everything is such a coincidence, as Dr. Nadel was just speaking with the other person. It was just tonight I went to pick up my sister at the airport. Let me start and say my mother has passed. It'll be April 21st, 1 year. And there are 7 of us, 5 girls, and we're all very close. And so I go to pick her and her husband up at the airport. And between the time that she landed and then she gets a phone call, and I'm sitting out there in front waiting to pick her up. And then she comes to me in the car and she said, "Are you playing a trick on me?" And I said, "No, I don't think, not me. I'm just sitting there waiting for you." And she said, "Well, I got a call from Mother's phone." And I said, "Well, how can that be?" She said, "Well, her number just popped up." And then she said, "I said hello." And then it was her message. "Hello, this is Jeannie. Please, leave a message." And she said, "Are you playing a trick on me?" I said, "No, I don't even have Mother's phone." And I said, "I bet Patty did, my other sister." So we called Patty, and this is 11 o'clock at night. And she said, "No, I'm asleep." And she said, "I've disconnected Mother's phone a long time ago." Wow. And so now, and my sister and I both just looked at each other, and she said when it showed her phone number, it had all these zeros up at the top and all at the bottom between the phone number. And, most of the time on your cell phone, it just shows just the number. But she said it had all these zeros all in between. Mm-hmm. And I thought, isn't that weird? And then I thought it was even more coincidence that I was able to get through to you tonight, because I've never even attempted it, and I know how many people try to get through.
Yes,
so
many.
What is your take on this? I can't even sleep. I guess that's why I'm up.
Okay, Doctor, are those who have passed able to make use of electromagnetic media in the way she described?
Well, there are many reports, and I said there's this whole field of it's called instrumental trance, TRANS communication, or ITC, in which there have been many reports of loved ones sending messages through the telephone lines, or through computers, or other forms of electronic communication. I'm not saying that it's common, but there certainly is a lot of anecdotal reports, and there are experiments being done in Luxembourg, in Europe, and here, in the United States as well.
That's interesting. Is there a place where some of these results, for example, from Luxembourg, are made public?
I believe if you look up instrumental trance, TRANS communication, you'll find the websites from the original researchers who are from Luxembourg, who first began to receive messages by telephone, and then I think also on the television as well. And I think that started in the 1960s.
That's a very interesting subject and worth pursuing. Would you suggest somebody would be a good guest in that area?
Mark Macy, who is here in Denver, who has written a number of books on the subject, And I think the most recent one is called Spirit Voices.
Okay. All right, I will pursue that. Thank you. Mary in Salt Lake City, Utah. You're on with Dr. Nadel.
Hello, Dr. Nadel, and hi, Art.
Hi.
I've told a story to Art before, and so I won't reiterate the entire story. I lost a baby daughter who I was fortunate enough to be taken to another world by an angel. Now, I happen to be Christian, and I saw her there, and I won't go into all of the parts, but I was wondering is it not possible that because I am Christian, an angel appeared to me? However, if I were Buddhist or of some other religion, you know, when you die, perhaps you are met by something
The one that you
someone you
expect.
can relate to.
Right. Yes, the one you expect, as it were.
Right. So you're not shocked.
Well, that's a fascinating question. When I had my near-death experience, I didn't see a priest or a rabbi or even a Native American medicine man. I saw a Chinese or a Tibetan healer or priest who...
Yes, but you've done a lot of study in that area.
Right. And I did have an angel appear to me, and I don't have any particular background in that would cause me to expect an angel. I can't really say if I can quote the author of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. The only thing we do know about the afterlife is that it lasts a lot longer than this one does.
Okay. Kim in Las Vegas, Nevada, you're on with Dr. Nadel. Good morning.
Hi, I am wondering what you can tell me about someone who commits suicide, what their experience on the other side may be, having left this plane in that fashion.
Okay, I'm also interested in that. Do you know anything at all, Dr. Nadel, about suicide?
I do know from colleagues who are professional mediums and also from clients who I've worked with where they've had a relative when we've done hypnosis where we've received a message from somebody who has committed suicide, that there is always a sense of unfinished business and an awareness of the anguish that the person caused to the people who are living. And very often when you go to a meeting with somebody like John Edward or James Von Prague or any really very experienced medium in a group, the communications come for people in the audience from people who have committed suicide because they do feel that they need to kind of go the extra mile, if you will, to try to make amends and to reassure and to apologize and to create some kind of bridge because they do experience the consequences of the pain that they've caused to others when they do commit suicide.
That actually makes sense to me. That you imagine more dire consequences of suicide, but actually the effect that you have on those left behind is pretty dire.
No, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and it's been my impression that when somebody has actually made a successful suicide, that they've made a successful attempt and have actually committed suicide, that the emotional pain that caused them to commit suicide, again, we're talking about something which is not physical. It doesn't change because they leave their physical body. I mean, they take the unfinished lessons from this particular lifetime, and the grieving of the people who are left behind is something that they are aware of, and they do attempt to communicate very often to kind of repair some of that damage.
Okay. Greg in Los Angeles, you're on with Dr. Nadel.
Hello, everybody. I first wanted to say I'm kind of half skeptical about some psychics, the prominent ones, because I don't recall hearing anybody come up with the most biggest event that came up most recently with Anna Nicole dying. I haven't heard anybody predict that. But what I wanted to add is an experience I had about 30 years ago when I was in my teens regarding deja vu. I somehow took each moment that I felt I was going through, almost like frame by frame, when I experienced it, and somebody was calling to me from another room, and the feeling was that I was to look to my left side and answer them. And once I heard them call to me and feel like I'm supposed to answer, instead I did the opposite and looked to my right and began to walk away from where they were calling from. And when I did that, I kind of laughed to myself saying, I didn't do what I was supposed to feel like I was supposed to do. And I nearly broke two of my toes on hitting a table leg. I'm kind of wondering how deja vu comes into play.
Deja vu is similar to synchronicity. It's kind of a glitch in time where you suddenly find yourself feeling that you have lived something before, that you know what's going to happen next. And again, it falls into the kind of broader spectrum of intuitive phenomena, because you know something without being able to explain it rationally.
Mm-hmm.
And
hey, how about just the karmic consequences of chuckling at your own intuitive warning?
It was almost like saying, I didn't do what...
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that's a decision. That's a behavioral decision, and maybe you thought you were trying to prove something or break a spell. And
I don't mess with those feelings anymore.
Right. And maybe your intuition was trying to protect you, as it usually is. Very often, we'll talk ourselves out of something intuitive because we think it's like we have Mr. Spock in our head saying that's not logical and that's not rational and don't listen to that and don't do that. And then we always look back later and say, something was telling me something and I wish I'd paid attention and I hadn't married that person or bought that stock or gone on that vacation. You always kind of remember the times that you wish you had paid attention. You just ask your toes, and they'll tell you.
Well said. All right, to Jimmy in Austin, Texas. You're on with Dr. Nadel. Hi.
Hello. Good morning. I had a near-death experience, and she was describing what I pretty much went through. It was a dark tunnel,
mm-hmm.
and as I kept walking through there, it was kind of like I was getting lost, and then finally I saw the light.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't go to it because I heard my mother's voice calling me, so I came back.
Mm-hmm.
But ever since then, I get these strong premonitions that, one day at work I got real sick, and then came home and found out that my house burned. So these things have been getting, real stronger ever since the near-death experience.
All right, well, that's something we'll pick up on other side of this break. But once you've had a near-death experience or something of that magnitude, many say it increases your PSI ability. We'll pick up on that when we return. More PSI after NDE, so many acronyms, but I wonder if it really does happen. Once you've had something as significant and profound as an NDE, a near-death experience, does that sort of, flip a switch that makes you more sensitive to things that we otherwise would not be? We'll ask about that in a moment. Dr. Laurie Nadel, 6 Sense, Unlocking Your Ultimate Mind Power. Assume it's available. Amazon.com, so many go there, as well as, is it still in stores, or is Amazon the place to go?
Amazon or Amazon UK. You can request it in stores, and it is available through the distributor, but I think you'll find it faster on Amazon. And if you go to www.unlockyour6thsense.com/onetimeoffer.html, you'll see the list of 16 bonuses that we have that add value to the book. No extra charge after you order the book on Amazon. Just go back to that page and you'll sign up and you'll receive your downloadable free bonuses that add value to the book.
Okay. Somebody said that crashed a little bit earlier, that the website crashed. It wouldn't surprise me. So if it did, folks, just keep trying. Nigel, I'm sorry.
I was going to say that we will be leaving this bonus up for a while because the great demand and the technical problems have kind of overwhelmed the site a little bit. But just keep trying.
Nigel in Toronto, Canada, you're on with Dr. Nadel.
Hi, Art. Hi, Doctor.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to relate a quick story. Earlier on, when I heard Art relating his story about knowing that someone was going to hit his car, and when it actually did happen, that unbelievable feeling how you fell to your knees, it just rang true to an experience I had recently. About 4 years ago, I went on somewhat of a business trip, and I met someone, just an acquaintance, met them for maybe 2 hours. They were related to the business I was doing. And this was 4 years ago. Met that person, went on, and never had a fleeting thought about that person for 4 years. Just kind of forgot about them. And about a couple of months ago, maybe 2 days before it happened, I just could not get this person out of my mind, knowing that I hadn't thought of them for years. And went through my day, actually woke up thinking about that person all day, and I kept saying to myself, why is this person popping into my head? It was almost uncontrollable. Later on that same day, I live in Toronto. It's a few million people here. Later on that very same day, as I'm thinking about that person sitting in my car, I pull up to a stoplight, and I look over beside me, and it was that very same person. We looked at each other, and we recognized each other, and we pulled over and shook hands, and I was like weak in my knees.
Yes.
From that experience. So I just wanted to tell you guys that quick story. It resonated a lot when Art told what happened to him. So.
Thank you, Nigel. That's exactly right. I mean, that's the way it is. It's very strong, very uncontrollable, and very unrepeatable, which is what makes it so tough, Doctor. If only we could learn to reliably repeat these things, we could just put quite an expression on a lot of scientists' faces.
This is true, but when a scientist has an experience like that, or someone like myself was a journalist who had experiences that I had no predisposition towards, the experiences were so compelling that they caused me to want to investigate further and come up with some reasonable explanations. And we were talking about trauma before, and we do know that when you have a near-death experience, when you witness death, especially your own death, even though there may be a peace that emerges as a result of having had a near-death experience, it does cause a traumatic impact in the brain and in the nervous system. And there is plenty of anecdotal evidence that there is a relationship between the aftermath of trauma and makes you more sensitive.
That's what I was about to ask. Yes,
right.
So it is true. It is true. If you have something of that magnitude happen, you then, I guess as a result of belief or the fact that it was demonstrated to you, and just a simple act of now believing that it is so allows the door to be opened and more comes to you?
I think that part of it is belief, but I think there's also physiology involved because trauma does affect, we want to call it the wiring, the neuronal circuits in the brain, change. And I think that whether it's a glitch or whether it's something that causes us to have more receptors in certain areas, but there's definitely, it's almost like you become more of a transformer, or that that satellite dish, that intuitive satellite dish is able to pick up more data or more signals, if you will. So I think there's a physiological shift with trauma that affects your intuitive processing.
Okay. Jan in San Diego, you're on with Dr. Nadel.
Hi, Dr. Nadel.
Hi.
Hi, this is Jan in San Diego. I think there's a lot to be said about a higher calling, maybe, too, as far as getting those receptors opened up after a traumatic experience. Sometimes, perhaps, my story was, I had 3 children, 1, 2, 3, and I was kind of in an abusive kind of situation. But my children, even at birth, I had two little boys, one like 11 months apart. And even at, as tiny as they were very, very intuitive. And even before their sister was born, they had described to me the birthing process. And, they were just, I couldn't believe how just in tune to themselves they were. And they told me that I was pregnant with their baby sister before I even realized I was pregnant again. And I said, no, Mommy not pregnant. Yes, sir, baby sister. And they'd pat my tummy. And so anyway, but I had several, traumatic things happen to me as far as my husband. But one day this woman came over, and immediately I just had this shaky feeling, and I just said, she's going to be bad. She's going to be bad news. And she was so nice, and she was being so kind to my children, and I couldn't stand her. I couldn't wait till she got out of my house. And my husband, he just said, oh, this is Carol, and I said, I just don't like her. And the kids, they were okay with her, but I said, Courtney, do you like her? And I thought I was going nuts because there was something wrong underneath, and I knew there was something wrong, and I thought, it must be me.
And so what happened?
Huh?
What happened?
Well, I wasn't sick, but my little girl came down with leukemia, and she died within that same year. She was diagnosed April 1st, and she died Christmas morning.
Right, but did it relate in some way to this
it did.
woman?
My husband ran off with this woman right after my daughter. Well, when my daughter was in the hospital and everything, they were having this mad affair. And she used my daughter, and I think she did. I'm sure she did. And they're still together, believe it or not. But anyway, I just knew all of this, and I had this dream, and I woke up, and I said, you cheated on me. And this one night he came home, and I knew. And there was nothing out of the ordinary that he did except for his footfalls were different. And I said, where did you go? Nowhere, and I just knew. I just went on to bed, but I knew right then and there. So I did, and it's just, and that dream was so vivid and real that nobody could tell me anything different.
No,
I'd seen it already.
Yeah, I understand what this lady is saying. There are many times you meet somebody,
yes,
and for no apparent reason whatsoever, you take an instant, very strong dislike of that person. And that's one of those intuitive moments where you better pay attention.
Absolutely. And, that is definitely solid information, like radar, that's buzzing and telling you, do not trust this person. And I think that's a very universal type, and I'm very sorry to hear about your daughter and about the pain that you've been through.
Yeah. Dale in Colorado, you're on with Dr. Nadel.
Yes, Mr. Bell. I wanted to also relate a story that is the same type of thing you had, only mine was a life and death thing. When I was 21, and I'm 64 now, I was married. I had two small children, one 25 months old and one 7 months old. I lived on the Central Coast in California, and my husband's family lived in L.A., and my family lived in Orange County, and we used to make regular trips every 2 to 3 weeks down to visit and back because I was kind of cut off from everybody living where I lived. And we would always go down for the holidays. Well, we went down for the Christmas, New Year holiday. He got 2 weeks off every year during that time. We were coming back on January 3rd. And what our tradition was that we would always travel at night because no traffic, the kids would be asleep, etc. We got out of the L.A. traffic just into Ventura. And the tradition was that I would lay down on my husband's lap and sleep until we got, maybe 50 miles from Santa Maria, and then I would wake up and make sure he stayed awake for the rest of the trip because he was pretty tired by then, and I would be real alert. And so I laid down on his lap. I've done this many times before. many, many trips before, and would sleep. Well, this night I could not. That premonition, I call it a premonition, came over me just like with you, Mr. Bell, so strong. I went into such a fear. I started shaking, and I would lay my head down on my husband's lap between him and the steering wheel, and I would jump up and look, and I'd lay back down, and I'd jump up and look, and this over and over again. And he'd say, will you relax and go to sleep? And I said, I can't. I'm scared. Something's wrong, And so we got around, I don't know, I think we were at around Ojai or a little above there. And all of a sudden, I felt my husband's thigh tense up and jumped off the gas onto the brake and jumped up. And there was only one car on the highway in front of us, and it had slammed on its brakes in front of us. We were in the right lane. He whipped over into the left lane to miss hitting them, and lo and behold, standing right square in the middle of the left lane was a big horse, standing with his butt toward us, but his neck craned around, so his eyes were just bugged, and he was frozen there. And so we whipped back over into the right-hand lane, and, of course, it was so fast, the car in front of us was in such shock themselves. They had not stepped on the gas to get out of our way. We had to go off the road to miss them, and where they cut the hill to make the highway was very, very, it was on a slant, and it was very soft shell. We started fishtailing around and dug into that soft shell. Rock, you know how when you're going to be in an accident, everything slows down real slow? And it was like a cradle. It felt like a cradle. And then we just rolled on over. But that soft shell, because we dug into it so good, it kept us from rolling hard, so nobody was hurt. And it to this day, now, I don't know if that set up the situation, but ever since then, about 4 or 5 other times in my life, I have been in very near-miss, high-speed possible accidents where we came within a hair's breadth of being, and I always knew ahead of time. I was on the alert and would be suddenly full of this absolute terror for my life.
Well, I'll tell you, mine
would happen.
Man, mine only occurred one time. Now, if yours has occurred that many times, I would think at some point you would listen to yourself so well that you would just stop the car and prevent anything from occurring,
The thing of it is, every time it happened, I wasn't driving. Now, the last time it happened, I was with a girlfriend traveling, and I told her, get over to the side of the road. She wouldn't do it. Yeah. And we almost got hit head on on the oncoming traffic. Long line of traffic, this little sports car got impatient and pulled out and was, just going like a bat out of hell.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to have to, we're short on time. I'm going to have to leave you and thank you. But so there you go. If I were to have a series of these, believe me, by the second one, if not the third, probably the second, I would learn to just stop the car, or if somebody else is driving, tell them to stop the car. I'm out of here. Doctor?
I would agree with you. I would do exactly the same thing.
In other words, listen and learn, or learn and listen.
That there have been studies of survivor personalities, and they find that the ability to pay attention to that warning or that premonition and take action immediately is one of the characteristics that keeps people alive. There's a story about Winston Churchill. He used to get into his car at a certain time every day, and one afternoon he heard a voice say, "Jump," so he jumped back, and a bomb went off, and it killed his chauffeur, but he was saved because he listened to that inner voice that just said, "Jump." And split-second warning sometimes.
That one I had not heard. Todd in Oklahoma City, you're on the air with Dr. Nadel.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
My question for the doctor is, in your opinion, after hearing all this, do you think that the events that occur on a day-to-day basis are already predetermined, or is there free will?
Oh, that's really, really a good, very good question, Doctor.
I think that is a question that's probably beyond my scope and probably beyond any human being's scope to actually know. I do think that we have free will, and I think that intuitions very often come ahead of time, so that we will learn to kind of take the information and act on it, because it's coming from a need or desire to help us protect ourselves and to stay safe. So I think a lot of things can be averted when we have a premonition. Not always, but a lot of the time.
Well, if they can be averted, then we're not marionettes on a string, or
right.
At least every now and then we can jump up and cut one of the strings.
Exactly, and that's why you get the voice that says jump, or the feeling that says stop the car, because you're being given advance information. The decision to act on it, that's where your free will comes in.
Mm-hmm. All right, very quickly, Rodney in Hampton, Virginia. You're on with Dr. Nadel.
Hello, Dr. Nadel, Art, and the thing I wanted to ask, how do you make this stop? Because this synchronicity thing has been just happening more and more frequently, and then it's hard to stop. I had a vision the other day, 4 days before the event. I saw one of our officers being hit in the head by somebody, and sure enough, it happened. But it was
okay, well, that's the opposite of what we've been getting. We're very short on time, Dr. Nadel, but he asks a question nobody else has. How do you stop it if you don't want it?
Well, again, you have to you have to know where is it, what's your personal signal, and you can turn it off. I think I would probably need a little bit more time to talk to this person and be able to come up with some switch that he could use to turn it off, but you can turn it off.
Yeah, I wonder if you'd want to. Well, this has all been very educational for me. I hope people will take the time to look at your website, take advantage of the offer, and get your book. Doctor, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I've really enjoyed it.
Good night, Doctor.
Good night.
All right, everybody, that's it for me for the weekend. George will resume with the normal weeknight show. We're here 7 nights a week for you, so have a wonderful week ahead. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you next weekend from the high desert, the great American Southwest. Good night.